Picture Spud Webb beneath an NBA rim in February of 1986. Around him are players built for the sky, including Dominique Wilkins, the defending champion and the most feared dunker in basketball. Webb is listed at 5 feet 7. The rim is 10 feet high. The numbers say this contest should belong to somebody else. Then Webb rises and the numbers stop explaining anything. That night at Reunion Arena in Dallas made him permanent. Fans who cannot name the teams he played for can still picture the red Atlanta uniform floating toward the basket. The victory gave basketball one of its purest underdog images. It also created a problem that followed Webb long after the cheers faded. The better the highlight aged, the easier it became to forget the player inside it. Webb understood the danger. He did not defend the title in 1987, although he would return in both 1988 and 1989 against extraordinary fields. Years later, when Hoops Hype asked what he wanted people to remember beyond the dunks, Webb answered without decoration, "I wanted to be known as a basketball player, not just a guy who could dunk." Those words identify the tension that followed Webb throughout his career. The contest lasted one night. His NBA career lasted 12 seasons. Between those two facts stands a player who was repeatedly marketed as a miracle while trying to earn the ordinary respect given to any reliable point guard. He did not reject the moment that made him famous. He simply wanted the rest of the work to count too. To understand why Webb cared so much about that respect, go back to Dallas to a crowded two-bedroom house and a boy whose nickname arrived before basketball did. Anthony Webb was born on July 13, 1963, in Dallas. Money was scarce and space was tighter. The family shared a small two-bedroom home. Basketball offered no guarantee of escape, but it gave Webb a place where speed, repetition, and nerve could change what happened next. The nickname came first. According to the family story, a hospital visitor saw the newborn's round head and thought of Sputnik, the satellite whose name was still lodged in the public imagination. Sputnik became Spud, and the shorter version followed him from the hospital to the playgrounds and eventually around the world. On those Dallas courts, height could not be negotiated. Webb learned to make the game move before larger players could set their feet. He kept the dribble low, changed direction without warning, and developed the leg strength that would later make photographs look unreal. His size was a disadvantage near the rim, but it also forced him to solve possessions earlier than everyone else. By the 7th grade, adults were already telling Webb that organized basketball would eventually become too large for him. His first place on a junior high roster came through a procedural accident. Two other players had not completed their physical examinations before the opening game. Webb received the vacancy and scored 22 points immediately. A temporary opening became evidence that the coaches could not ignore. The spectacular part of his athleticism appeared early. Webb has said that he could dunk when he stood about 5 feet 3, but the dunk was never the foundation of his game. A player that size could not wait for a clear runway every possession. He had to bring the ball up against pressure, create passing angles through bodies, and finish before shot blockers understood where he had gone. The leap attracted attention. The guard skills kept him on the floor. At Wilmer Hutchins High School, Webb averaged 26 points as a senior. The production was obvious, yet serious college interest remained scarce. Recruiters were not evaluating only what he had done. They were trying to imagine whether any of it could survive against longer, faster defenders, and most of them decided the answer was no. The rejection had a specific sting. Webb was not overlooked because nobody had watched him play. He was overlooked after they watched. Every strong performance had to overcome a projection about the next level, and the next level always seemed to offer the same excuse. The bodies would be bigger there. The opportunity finally came from Midland College in West Texas. Junior college lacked the television exposure and prestige Webb wanted, but it offered minutes, structure, and a path forward. For once, he did not need to persuade a recruiter with an argument about potential. He could put the answer on a scoreboard. In 1982, he led the Midland Chaparrals all the way to the Junior College National Championship, and the title game itself was the kind of moment that turns a name into a story. Midland faced top-ranked, previously unbeaten Miami-Dade North, and the two teams went to war. It took double overtime to settle it. When it was finally over, Midland had won it, 93-88. At the center of it all was the smallest man on the floor. Spud Webb scored 36 points in that championship game. 36. He shot 10 of 15 from the field and a scorching 16 of 18 from the free throw line. On the biggest stage he'd ever stood on against the best team in the country, he was the best player in the building. The championship earned Webb national attention, including a feature in Sports Illustrated. He returned to Midland rather than treating one tournament as sufficient proof. Over 2 seasons, the Chaparrals went 65-8. As a sophomore, Webb averaged roughly 14.5 points and 10 assists, then received NJCAA All-American recognition in 1983. That second season changed the question around Webb. The championship performance had shown what he could do on one enormous night. Averaging 10 assists showed that an offense could depend on his decisions for months. Recruiters no longer had to imagine a role from a highlight. They could study a point guard directing a team that rarely lost St. Midland, also gave Webb something high school had not: film against older competition and a team whose success could not be dismissed as a local scoring show. He left with a national title and a 65-8 record. If another program passed on him now, it would be making that decision with 2 full college seasons available for examination. The resume appeared strong enough for a major program: a national title, national coverage, an All-American selection, and 2 seasons of winning. The obstacle that followed was different. It was not a defender or a skeptical scouting report, but a coaching change that erased the only scholarship plan Webb possessed. That coach was Bill Blakely at North Texas. Webb planned to transfer there, but Blakely was fired in May of 1983. The scholarship path disappeared with him. Webb began preparing to work at his father's neighborhood grocery store, Webb Soul Mart, because practical life could not wait indefinitely for basketball to make up its mind. For a few weeks, the future narrowed from major college basketball to a job at the family store. No NBA organization was tracking Webb as a future asset, and no second university was waiting with a comparable offer. The danger was not a dramatic defeat. It was that basketball might simply stop providing a next game. Blakely continued helping him. He contacted Tom Abatamarco, an assistant at North Carolina State, and took him to a summer league game at the MLK Recreation Center in Dallas. There was no polished recruiting visit and no arena presentation. Abatamarco watched Webb control an ordinary run in a local gym and decided the performance deserved a conversation with Jim Valvano. He arranged a meeting with the NC State head coach, Jim Valvano. The timing made the offer even more remarkable. Valvano's team had just won the 1983 national championship by upsetting Houston on Lorenzo Charles's last-second finish. The reigning champions did not need a publicity project. They needed guards capable of surviving the Atlantic Coast Conference, and Valvano believed Webb could become one. The first season was uneven for the team. NC State finished 19-14 and missed the NCAA tournament, a reminder that Webb had not stepped into a continuation of the championship celebration. He had to help rebuild the backcourt while adapting to longer defenders and a far more demanding schedule. By his senior season, the pieces had come together. NC State won 23 games and entered the NCAA tournament as a 3rd seed. The Wolfpack beat Nevada, Texas El Paso, and Alabama before St. John's ended the run in the Elite Eight. Webb was no decorative attraction on that team. He averaged 11.1 points and 5.3 assists as a senior and earned all-region recognition. Across 66 games for NC State, he delivered 373 assists. In one victory over Northeastern, he recorded 18, still among the highest single-game totals in school history. The statistic mattered because it measured anticipation rather than height. Webb was learning how to create shots for teammates before a defense could make his field of vision the story. NC State also measured Webb's vertical leap at 42 inches. The figure finally placed a number beside what teammates saw in the gym. He was giving away height at the start of every jump, then recovering much of it through acceleration and force. The measurement explained the photographs without explaining the player. A vertical test contains no defender, clock, or decision. Webb still had to convert that explosion into usable basketball while carrying responsibilities that had nothing to do with leaving the floor. The vertical number attracted attention, but NC State needed a point guard rather than a laboratory result. Across 2 seasons, Webb averaged 10.4 points and 5.7 assists. He had to organize a major conference offense, recognize defenses, and deliver the ball through passing lanes formed by players much longer than he was. Webb could not wait for a taller defender to use his reach. He had to act first. He crossed half-court quickly, changed direction before the defense settled, and released the ball while the passing lane still existed. When a defender turned to contain the drive, Webb was already deciding whether to finish, stop, or send the ball elsewhere. His speed was most valuable before it looked spectacular. The 18-assist game against Northeastern grew from that habit. Webb was rarely throwing passes over the defense. He was moving the defense and delivering the ball through the space it abandoned. A bounce pass could travel beneath an outstretched arm. An early pass in transition could reach a teammate before the opposing center arrived. He did not need to see the entire floor from above if he understood where it was about to open. His size still collected a price. Larger guards could take him toward the post, contest his jumper without leaving their feet, and force him to search for angles near the rim. Some nights those problems won. Webb's achievement was not making height irrelevant. It was building a game that could absorb the disadvantage without allowing it to control every possession. The vertical leap drew attention, but the decisions gave coaches a reason to keep handing him the ball. Even the official measurement has never been completely stable. Historical accounts usually introduced him at 5'7", while the NBA's current profile lists 5'6". Webb himself has joked about being shorter still on the day of the famous contest. The argument does not change with the inch. Every version placed him far outside the league's preferred dimensions. Against Wake Forest, Webb encountered the rare point guard who made him look tall. Muggsy Bogues stood 5'3", 4 inches below Webb's listed height. The image invited an easy comparison, but the game resisted it. Bogues applied relentless ball pressure and protected possessions with unusual control. Webb attacked open space with more scoring aggression and could turn an uncontested lane into a threat above the rim. The matchup mattered because it separated size from style. When Bogues later reached the NBA and replaced Webb as its shortest player, the public naturally grouped them together. Coaches could not prepare for them the same way. Bogues threatened a ball handler's security and passing rhythm. Webb threatened the defense before it became organized, using his first step and vertical explosion to make a clear lane dangerous. They faced a similar physical problem and built recognizably different careers around it. At NC State, the spectacular leap was now attached to film of a real guard making ordinary basketball decisions. That combination was supposed to make the professional evaluation easier. Instead, it created a new problem. Scouts could admire the athletic feat without trusting the player who produced it. The vertical leap made Webb memorable, but it did not settle his professional future. Some evaluators imagined Europe. Others mentioned the Harlem Globetrotters, as though unusual athleticism made him more suitable for an exhibition than an NBA rotation. Webb kept running into the same contradiction. The skill that made people notice him also encouraged them to treat him as an attraction. Before the NBA draft, he played for the Rhode Island Gulls in the new United States Basketball League. The roster created one of basketball's most enduring photographs. Webb stood beside Manute Bol, who was listed at 7'7", a difference of roughly 2 full feet. The image was irresistible, but it flattened both men into measurements. Bol was a serious rim protector. Webb was a serious point guard. The photograph made them look like a traveling curiosity before either had played an NBA game. Webb used the Gulls as another audition. He had survived high school, junior college, and the Atlantic Coast Conference, yet the NBA still treated him as a remote possibility. In the 1985 draft, his name remained uncalled through the first 3 rounds. Detroit finally selected Webb with the 87th pick in the 4th round. In a draft that lasted deep into the afternoon, that choice carried little protection. The Pistons controlled his rights, but they did not owe him a roster place, minutes, or patience. Detroit waived him before the regular season. The decision looked less like a shocking injustice than the outcome most of the league had expected. A 5'7" 4th-round guard had reached the edge of the NBA and been turned back. Bill Blakely, the coach whose firing had disrupted Webb's college plan, was now his agent. He arranged another audition with Atlanta. Webb entered camp without a guaranteed role and beat out more experienced guards for the final roster. The achievement that mattered most was not a dunk or a measurement. It was seeing his name among the 12 players allowed to stay. That roster placed him beside Dominique Wilkins, the reigning dunk champion. Wilkins had power, size, and a reputation already contained in his nickname, the human highlight film. Webb was a rookie fighting for reserve minutes. They appeared to occupy different levels of the sport. A few months later, they would meet in a contest that treated them as equals. On February 8, 1986, the NBA brought All-Star Weekend to Reunion Arena in Dallas. Webb returned home as an NBA player, but almost nobody entered the building expecting him to leave as its champion. But make no mistake, nobody came to see Spud Webb win. The heavy favorite was a man he knew well, his own Atlanta teammate, Dominique Wilkins. Wilkins wasn't just good, he was the reigning champion, the defending king of this event, a human highlight reel who had beaten a young Michael Jordan to take the crown in 1985. Everyone expected him to do it again. On paper, it wasn't even a contest. It was a coronation waiting to happen. The invitation arrived late. Webb had already attracted attention with in-game dunks during his rookie season, but the league initially viewed him more as an entertaining possibility than a favorite. Atlanta general manager Stan Kasten pushed for his inclusion. The schedule then became absurd. Webb appeared with Johnny Carson in Los Angeles the night before the event, traveled back toward Dallas, and entered the contest with little rest. There was no elaborate private routine waiting for television. Webb had developed the movements over years at a recreation center in Dallas. Because his hands were too small to control the ball like Wilkins, he used the floor and backboard. He learned how firmly to bounce the ball, where it would return, and how to meet it at the exact point where his jump could become a finish. That detail changes the visual. The self-pass was not decoration added for difficulty. It was part of the solution. Webb could not simply carry the ball through every motion, so he converted a limitation into timing. The dunks looked spontaneous because the preparation had been absorbed long before anybody thought to film it. The contest itself was not even shown live across the country. It reached much of the television audience on tape delay. Inside Reunion Arena, the crowd saw the upset first. Outside it, the result began traveling through calls and word of mouth before many fans saw the pictures. The memory would become instant, even if the broadcast was not. Wilkins later said he had never seen his teammate reveal the complete routine. That gave the opening attempts a second layer. The favorite was discovering the opponent at the same time as the crowd. Webb began with power that contradicted the expectation of a novelty appearance. He produced a one-handed tomahawk, a double clutch in which the ball seemed to pause with him, and a full 360-degree turn. The movements were recognizable dunk contest ideas. Their scale changed because of the distance Webb had to travel before reaching the rim. The self-passes separated him from the field. On one attempt, he used a bounce to set up a reverse finish. On the decisive sequence, the ball struck the floor, rose toward the backboard, and returned to Webb for a one-handed slam. The bounce, jump, catch, and finish had no room to drift apart. He made the chain look like one action. In the final round, the judges handed Webb 2 perfect 50s. He had beaten Wilkins in the defending champions event and done it in his own hometown. By the time the broadcast and highlights spread, the upset belonged to the entire country. The field made the result larger. Webb had not won an exhibition designed around his height. He had advanced through a group that included Jerome Kersey, Terrence Stansbury, Paul Pressey, Terry Tyler, Roy Hinson, and Gerald Wilkins before meeting Dominique. Each competitor was an established NBA athlete with more reach and a more conventional path to the basket. After the final score, Bill Russell interviewed Webb while the crowd chanted his name. The prize was $12,500, almost 1/5 of his $70,000 rookie salary. Useful as the money was, it was the picture of Webb beside Russell that announced the larger change. A 4th-round pick who had nearly missed the league was now the face of All-Star Saturday. Because the contest reached much of the country on tape delay, the news initially sounded impossible even inside the Hawks organization. Stan Kasten called the team president and asked him to guess the winner. Dominique was the obvious answer. When Kasten said Spud, disbelief came first. On the team bus, Doc Rivers reduced the consequences to 5 words. Your life just changed forever. The scale of the memory soon exceeded the building. Webb later joked that 200,000 people claimed to have attended a contest staged before fewer than 17,000. Endorsement offers followed. The red, black, and white Pony City wings he wore became known as the Spuds, giving a 4th-round rookie a recognizable shoe while the modern market was reorganizing itself around stars such as Michael Jordan. That attention gave Webb financial security and a place in popular culture. It also fixed him inside a single visual: height, takeoff, surprise. 1 week after the contest, he told a reporter that the accomplishment he valued most had occurred before Dallas. He had qualified for the event because Atlanta had already judged him good enough to occupy one of the scarce places on an NBA roster. The difference between those achievements would become clear almost immediately. The contest proved that Webb could astonish an arena. His rookie postseason would show whether he could direct an NBA team when the basket was defended and the result counted in the standings. Then he supplied the evidence on an NBA floor. In Game 2 of Atlanta's first-round playoff series against Detroit, Webb came off the bench for 19 points, 7 rebounds, and 18 assists. Producing 18 assists in a playoff game at age 22 required vision and control that had nothing to do with elevation. Against the franchise that had waived him, he controlled the game from the ground. Detroit was a perfect opponent for the emotional version of the story, but the basketball context makes the performance stronger. The Pistons had Isaiah Thomas, Vinnie Johnson, and rookie Joe Dumars in their backcourt. Waiving a 4th-round guard had not been an act of personal cruelty. It had been a roster decision made by a team with established options. Webb answered it without needing to turn anyone into a villain. He had already scored 18 points in 17 minutes during Atlanta's Game 1 victory. 2 nights later, he played 30 minutes, attempted only 8 shots, reached the foul line 16 times, and created 18 assists as the Hawks scored 137. The control matters as much as the total. Webb did not chase revenge by forcing shots. He kept sending teammates toward the better opportunity. Atlanta won the best-of-5 series 3-1. Webb did not produce 18 assists every night, and he did not replace Rivers as the starting point guard. What he gave the Hawks was a second tempo. Detroit could prepare for Wilkins and the starting offense, then watch a 5'7" reserve enter and turn the same game into a race. Those Hawks were not a low-pressure laboratory. They won 50 games, and Wilkins led the NBA at more than 30 points per night. Atlanta eliminated Detroit, then met a Boston team that would win 67 games and the championship. Every reserve possession mattered because the Hawks were trying to extend a real postseason run. Down 3-0 against Boston, Atlanta turned to Webb for energy in Game 4. He responded with 21 points and 12 assists in 24 minutes, helping the Hawks avoid a sweep with a 106-94 victory. The Celtics ended the series 2 nights later, but the performance showed why Atlanta had kept him. When the season became most demanding, Webb could change at speed. His progression was not smooth after that breakthrough. Injuries limited him to 33 games in his second season. The setback interrupted the easy version of the underdog story, in which every proof leads automatically to a larger role. Webb had made the league and become nationally famous. He could still lose months and return to the same competition for minutes. Atlanta itself became one of the East's strongest regular season teams, winning at least 50 games in 4 consecutive seasons from 1986 through 1989. Doc Rivers controlled much of the offense. Wilkins required touches. Webb's job changed according to health, matchup, and rotation. The situation helped him learn winning basketball, but it did not always provide the volume required to build an individual resume. The next All-Star weekends provided a useful correction to the idea that Webb won once and then protected the legend by disappearing. He sat out the 1987 contest, but he did not retire from the event. In 1988, Webb entered the celebrated Chicago field with Michael Jordan, Dominique Wilkins, Clyde Drexler, Jerome Kersey, Otis Smith, and Greg Anderson. The context was no longer the same as Dallas. Injuries had limited Webb to 33 games in his second NBA season, and surprise had been replaced by expectation. Every attempt would now be compared with a night that could not be recreated. His first-round scores eliminated him early. The former champion became a supporting name, while Jordan and Wilkins created the duel that would dominate every replay of that afternoon. Webb returned again in 1989. This time he survived the opening round and finished third, behind winner Kenny Walker and runner-up Drexler. The result rarely appears in summaries of his career, but it completes the record. He entered 3 NBA dunk contests, won 1, and remained competitive enough to outlast most of the field 3 years later. Houston showed that Webb was not present merely as a former champion invited to revive an old memory. He cleared the opening round and remained within reach of another championship before his last attempt ended the run. There were no perfect 50s and no hometown finish this time. The result did not recreate the mythology of Dallas, but it was another credible performance against a field that already knew exactly what he could do. Those later appearances did not reproduce the perfect ending in Dallas. That was precisely the point. A contest could turn a player into a national figure, but even a former champion had to start again at 0 when the judges raised their cards. Webb accepted that risk rather than treating the 1986 trophy as a museum piece. Meanwhile, his value to Atlanta was being decided somewhere less theatrical. Contracts and minutes depended on whether he could guard, pass, shoot, and organize possessions after opponents had accumulated seasons of film. The dunks remained part of his resume. They were no longer the test that determined whether he stayed on the floor. Atlanta did not hide Webb for 6 uninterrupted years. The truth is more interesting than that. He began as a reserve because the Hawks already had an established backcourt and championship ambitions built around Wilkins. In his rookie season, Webb appeared in 79 games, but started only 8. He earned trust possession by possession, often changing pace rather than dominating the ball. By the 1989-90 season, his role had grown substantially. Webb played all 82 games and started 46 of them, averaging more than 5 assists while shooting nearly 48% from the floor. The following season, he started 64 times and reached 13.4 points and 5.6 assists per game. Atlanta had not refused to use him. It had taken years to move him from an energizing reserve into a regular starter. Those were not ceremonial starts arranged for a popular player. Webb had to take the opening matchup, bring Atlanta into its offense, and remain useful after opponents adjusted. The same size that created excitement off the bench became a problem teams could target from the first possession. He survived because the speed was attached to decisions: when to push, when to pull the ball back, and when to deliver it to Wilkins before a second defender arrived. The role also demanded restraint. A reserve can enter with instructions to accelerate a stalled game. A starting point guard must recognize when acceleration will only create a bad shot. Webb's assist totals grew as Atlanta trusted him with that choice. By the time he was starting 64 games, his place in the rotation no longer depended on surprising anyone. On March 5, 1991, he scored 32 points in a fast, high-scoring victory over Denver. It was not an isolated appearance from the end of a bench. It came during a season in which he started most nights and carried a real share of Atlanta's offense. Still, the Hawks were Dominique Wilkins' team, and Webb's public identity remained tied to the contest. A transaction in the summer of 1991 finally separated his basketball life from the city where the famous night had followed him everywhere. Atlanta traded him to Sacramento for Travis Mays. Sacramento did not give Webb his first chance to start. It gave him his clearest chance to run an offense without an asterisk. He started all 77 games he played in his first Kings season and averaged 35 minutes a night. No special role was required. He brought the ball up, initiated sets, managed tempo, and absorbed the same nightly responsibility as any other lead guard. In that first Sacramento season, Webb produced career highs of 16 points and 7.1 assists per game. He also averaged 1.6 steals and shot better than 36% from three, an important adjustment for a guard who had entered the league before the three-point shot shaped every possession. The numbers describe more than an increase in minutes. They show a player carrying several parts of an offense at once. The Kings finished only 29-53, so the season should not be rewritten as a hidden championship campaign. Webb was not suddenly leading a contender. He was proving something narrower and more personal. Over 77 starts and nearly 3,000 minutes, an NBA team could ask him to perform the complete job of a starting point guard. Sacramento's leading scorer was Mitch Richmond, a powerful shooting guard who could punish a defense from several levels. Webb's responsibility was to deliver the ball on time, attack when defenders leaned toward Richmond, and keep a struggling team organized. His size did not disappear from the scouting report. Opponents tried to post him, trap him, and shoot over him. The Kings kept placing the ball in his hands anyway. The full schedule supplied moments that the famous photograph could never contain. On April 21, 1993, Webb scored a career-high 34 points against Golden State. Sacramento lost heavily, so the performance cannot be dressed up as a franchise-changing night. It still showed how far his offensive responsibility had expanded. The guard, once projected as an exhibition attraction, was now capable of leading an NBA team in scoring. Nearly a year later, he played all 48 minutes of an overtime game against the Lakers and finished with 32 points and 12 assists. The Kings lost that one as well, but the combination captured his job more completely than a scoring total alone. Webb had to create his own offense, manufacture shots for teammates, and keep making decisions through an entire extended game. His last Sacramento season produced a quieter achievement with a cleaner result. In 1994-95, Webb made 93.4% of his free throws and led the NBA. The contrast could hardly be better. Dunking is acceleration, timing, and spectacle. Free throw shooting removes the movement and leaves repetition. Webb stood 15 feet from the basket and converted more reliably than every qualified shooter in the league. The result came one season after he had shot roughly 81%, evidence of a veteran refining a skill rather than depending on the explosion that first made him famous. Nobody built a poster around a man standing still at the line, yet the title reveals a different part of his professionalism: touch refined through repetition, concentration without movement, and the discipline to improve a mature skill late in a career. The legs that created the surprise in Dallas could lose force. control could remain. In 1995, Sacramento traded the 32-year-old guard back to Atlanta for Tyrone Corbin. It was a basketball transaction, not a betrayal. Webb's role had already begun to shrink, and the league was moving toward its next group of guards. Returning to the Hawks joined the two versions of his identity in one place: the city where he had become famous and the veteran trying to extend his career. The reunion lasted only part of a season. Atlanta later included Webb and Andrew Lang in the deal that brought Christian Lettner and Sean Rooks from Minnesota. For the Timberwolves, Webb became an experienced option rather than the center of the backcourt. The change was ordinary and therefore revealing. After years of being described as physically unique, he was aging through the same role reductions that reach almost every guard. His final route was not a straight line from Minnesota to retirement. Webb played in Italy for Masch Verona, returned to the NBA for 4 games with Orlando in the 1997-98 season, and also appeared for the Idaho Stampede in the Continental Basketball Association. He kept looking for a floor after the guaranteed NBA role had disappeared. When the playing career ended in 1998, the accounting was substantial: 12 NBA seasons, 814 regular season games, 429 starts, 8,072 points, and 4,342 assists. Those totals do not turn him into an all-star or erase the limits imposed by his size. They establish something more useful. Webb was a productive NBA guard for far too long to be explained by publicity. The contest occupied minutes. His NBA regular season career occupied 20,288 of them. More than half of his appearances began in the starting lineup. Public memory chose the shorter version because it was easier to replay, but the longer record is what teams repeatedly chose to trust. The playing career ended, but the image from Dallas remained available to a generation that had not seen it live. In 2006, Nate Robinson entered the slam dunk contest as a 5'9" rookie from the New York Knicks. The obvious comparison was waiting before he completed his first attempt. Robinson did not avoid it. He called Webb and asked him to become part of the performance. On contest night, Webb appeared in his old Atlanta number 4. He stood beneath the basket while Robinson cleared him and finished the dunk, earning a perfect score. 20 years after Webb had changed the scale of the event, another undersized guard used him as both obstacle and reference point. The rehearsal captured their shared confidence. Webb later said they practiced once. Robinson placed him on the floor, jumped over him several times without contact, and decided the preparation was complete. The public saw a tribute. Webb could also recognize the calculation beneath it: distance, timing, takeoff, and the willingness to commit when the whole plan could fail in front of a national audience. Robinson eventually won the contest. The moment did not replace Webb's victory. It demonstrated how completely the earlier one had entered basketball language. A short guard no longer had to invent the idea from nothing. He could point backward to 1986 and show that the impossible had already happened once. That influence is difficult to measure with career totals. Children who stood well below their teammates could watch Webb and imagine a role for themselves in the sport. The inspiration was real, but it can also produce a lazy version of the story in which belief alone defeats physical limitations. Webb's career says something more demanding. Confidence opened the attempt. Skill determined whether a coach could keep him on the floor. He needed a handle secure enough to survive pressure, a jumper reliable enough to punish space, and passing judgment quick enough to move the defense before it used its length. He needed strength because opposing guards would try to take him into the post. He needed conditioning because speed was not a decorative advantage. It was part of his protection. At his height, an ordinary night could quickly become evidence for every person who had predicted failure. In 2010, the Texas Legends, the NBA Development League affiliate of the Dallas Mavericks, named Webb president of basketball operations. The job returned him to North Texas, close to the courts and schools where his own route had begun. It also kept him around players living near the edge of an NBA roster. G League teams are filled with undrafted prospects, veterans attempting comebacks, and young players whose opportunity may depend on a single opening. Webb knew that territory without needing it explained. His own career had passed through junior college, a summer recreation center game, the Rhode Island Gulls, a fourth-round selection, and one last audition in Atlanta. The title was not attached to a brief promotional appearance. Webb remained with the organization as the Development League became the G League. As of 2026, the Texas Legends still list him as their president of basketball operations. He has now spent longer in that position than he spent playing in the NBA. The role does not mean Webb ignores measurements or believes every overlooked player will succeed. He knows more clearly than most how severe the physical demands are. But after an entire career spent watching evaluators treat one number as a conclusion, he now works in the part of basketball where incomplete resumes receive another game, another practice, and sometimes another answer. None of this makes the dunk contest less important. It remains the reason his name can cross generations in seconds. Show the footage to somebody who has never seen Webb and no introduction is required. The height of the rim, the size of Wilkins, and the violence of the takeoff explain the upset immediately. The problem begins only when the footage is treated as the whole biography. Webb himself eventually reached a more generous conclusion than the conflict suggests. When people approached him decades later, he did not assume they saw only a stunt. He told Hoops Hype that the attention felt like appreciation for his style and for the dedication behind 12 seasons. He understood that the dunk was how the conversation began, not necessarily where every fan's respect ended. That history answers the question at the center of his life. Did the night that made Spud Webb famous also hide his career? Yes, in one important sense. The 16-point season, the 18-assist playoff game, the free throw title, and more than 4,000 career assists occupy far less space in basketball memory than the contest. One night became easier to recall than 814 games. But the moment also carried the career beyond its final season. It preserved his name long enough for new viewers to discover the rest. It connected him to Robinson, brought him back into All-Star Weekend, and kept sending curious fans toward the seasons they had never seen. Without the dunk, Webb might have received more accurate recognition from serious fans and far less recognition from everyone else. The fairest version of the legacy holds both truths. Spud Webb was never an NBA superstar. He did not make an all-star team or lead Sacramento into the playoffs. His height created real defensive problems, and the greatest team success of his career came while he was part of a deeper Atlanta roster, rather than carrying an offense himself. He was also never a gimmick. Gimmicks do not survive 12 NBA seasons, start hundreds of games, produce 16 points and 7 assists over a full year, or lead the league in free throw percentage at age 31. Publicity may create an invitation. It cannot protect a player through 814 nights of professional evaluation. The contest showed what Webb could do when the floor was empty, and every eye followed him into the air. The career showed what he could do when the floor was crowded, the defense knew his weaknesses, and nobody promised to remember the possession. One night made him immortal. The seasons around it explain why he belonged there in the first place.